Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, it's been some time since I've spoken about the Chris Watts case. I do want to talk a little bit about Joe Kenda and how he knew Chris Watts was guilty. Now, what's quite interesting with criminal psychology, and a part that a lot of people miss, is that the criminal in some cases is trying to think what you think, and he's trying to think what he thinks you want to hear, something that will kind of close the little or join the dots in your mind in terms of what you don't know. So during his sermon on the porch, we all saw Chris Watts saying the right stuff, well, sort of, but something didn't look right. Something felt off, didn't it? Not knowing the real Chris Watts, it was hard to know what was off without a baseline. We didn't know then that he was sort of an introvert. We didn't know that he was sort of reserved. We didn't know that he basically wasn't a very emotionally expressive person to begin with. In fact, you kind of get the best assessment of Chris Watts being off baseline from the neighbor, Nathaniel Trinastich, saying, he never talks this much. And his body language was weird, he's shifting left to right, all that kind of thing. So, but we didn't know that. The neighbor kind of had quite a good idea, and he was right about that. But even without a baseline, Watts simply didn't seem concerned enough to most of us under the circumstances, did he? He thought his kind of gambit here, his sort of attitude to how he needed to play this was by being nonchalant, not completely nonchalant, but basically nonchalant. And he thought nonchalance was the way to go. In his mind, he probably thought, look, this is the story. I'm divorcing my wife, and if she left me, I'm the victim here, and she's the one that's upset. So why would I be upset? I mean, I'm not the emotional one in this story, she is, right? And that was very much part of what's the sort of narrative, was that everybody knew Shanann, everyone knew that Shanann could get upset, everyone knew that Shanann could lose her temper, everyone knew that Shanann could kind of leave in a huff. And so that was kind of his story. And his sort of own story was, this isn't about me, it's about her. She got upset and then she left, kind of thing. And so, don't pay attention to me, go and pay attention to her, right? But the thing that I don't think he realized is that people weren't really thinking about it as deeply as that. And obviously people watching the news didn't know Shanann and also didn't know him. So you could argue that he was actually he was performing for the people who knew Shanann, meaning Shanann's parents, his parents and friends and his friends and so on. So it probably wasn't a good look for Kissinger either in his mind if he was sort of collapsed and crying, sort of sobbing on the porch in front of the cameras because his wife had left him. I mean, what kind of message was that going to send on the day that he kind of is supposed to divorce his wife? He's in tears, he's overwrought. It's kind of going to be shooting himself in the foot if he's undertaken to Kissinger to say, I'm going to get divorced. And then when his wife is gone, he's crying in front of the cameras. He looks very upset. Then she would say, look, you're not ready for this relationship with me, kind of thing. Can you see how that makes sense? So I think he was making it quite complicated. But, I think Barry Morphew probably put on a better performance or more authentic performance. And of course, we still don't know exactly what happened there. But Barry Morphew certainly looks more heartbroken in his appearance, in front of I think he did it on for Facebook or something. But he certainly looks more sincere. The thing is, if Chris Watts thought he was just acting for Kissinger, he was mistaken, because Colorado, America and the world were watching, as well as three figureheads in law enforcement, Coda, Lee and Kenda. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So Kenda said he knew immediately Watts was guilty, but to be fair, many of us did. The seasoned homicide hunter added in this regard, and this comes from an article, and I think the article is titled "The Team Behind Homicide Hunter." It's from wbko.com, and what he said was he knew Chris Watts, the Colorado man now serving, this is a quote from that article, the Colorado man now serving a life sentence, was guilty the first time he saw him on TV. Now, I don't think that's rocket science. I think a lot of us did know that. Not everyone did. I came across some articles that said, experts were saying that he's actually good at misleading people, that he's a good liar. And I thought that was quite a silly thing to say for the experts. And that was around about the 17th, I think, of August 2018. Anyway, at the time, Kenda turned to his wife and he said he killed them all. He killed all three of them. And then he sort of emphasized, when he's standing there talking to that press person from Denver 7, what was he doing? Well, he had his arms folded, and this is a quote from Kenda. He had his arms folded, he's protecting himself, he's pacing, he's looking back and forth. He won't look at the camera, he won't look at the reporter, he doesn't want to make eye contact. He's being supposedly distraught, but his body says he's guilty as sin. And 2 days later, they arrested him. And that's the end of the quote. I also think that Watts took the simplistic psychology of nonchalance into the polygraph exam and then into the plea deal. Just to go a little bit further into what Kenda's saying, you can sort of slice it at different layers. So first of all, you could say Kenda's right, that Watts had something to hide and that Watts was feeling insecure and frightened and anxious, when he gave this interview. And, the cadaver dogs at the time were inside his home barking and so on. And a lot was kind of going on. And yes, so he was trying to protect himself. He was trying to, escape liability or culpability for what he'd done. And he did look a little bit jumpy. He was looking back and forth. He only looked at the camera sort of briefly, where the reporter actually had to say to him, don't you want to make an appeal? And when he looks at the camera, he's got sort of a funny look on his face. He talks about that he won't look at the reporter and doesn't want to make eye contact. Now, I think Kenda's correct just in saying, he doesn't look very distraught. In fact, there are a lot of things to say about that, but all the little chuckles and smiles and looks on his faces and just some of the things that he said, that is something I've been intending to do for a while. I haven't forgotten about it, is take you guys through, like putting the interview on my television and then recording myself in front of it and just stopping it at every little cue and every little sign. I'm just not. I don't really want to do that right now. I might do it a few months down the line. But I think what's kind of important to stress here is that what Kenda's saying isn't necessarily true, just in the sense of if Chris Watts is an introvert, he's going to have his arms folded anyway. I'm just saying, if you've got an introvert who's talking to the media, even if he's sincere, he's going to feel a little bit like his space is being invaded. And do you remember that other guy who gave a similar sort of dodge? It seemed like quite a dodgy thing. I think his name was Shane, and his pregnant wife had also disappeared. He also seemed to be a bit strange. That doesn't necessarily mean that someone's guilty of murder. It just means that they might be hiding something, or it might mean that in terms of their personality, they are quite reserved. But what I think, if you take all of these cues that we saw, the protecting of himself, the arms folding, the looking back and forth, the sort of swaying from the one side to the other, you take that and you combine it with the little chuckles and the little funny comments, it was pretty inappropriate. And and then if you just do a little bit of analysis of the statement, the fact that he never once said that his wife was pregnant in 15 minutes of talking to the media, that was a major giveaway. And that actually showed that he was hiding something, very important. The fact that he was sort of locked into his marriage via this pregnancy. And I think Shanann felt the same way. Pregnancy was actually his idea. And that was also the thing that was going to be a problem in his new relationship with Kissinger if he wasn't careful. And the gender reveal was supposed to be the day before. He doesn't talk about that, and so on and so on. So while I'm here, I just want to respond to two things I heard on the sort of YouTube airwaves. The one was from someone that I think you're probably familiar with, who was just saying that they don't understand how Chris Watts could have been convicted when he went to trial and no evidence was provided. I sort of listened to that and I sort of thought, did you have like a logic failure? Do you just selectively think of certain things, or kind of what's going on here? The reason they didn't need to present evidence was because Chris Watts confessed. So if he gave the first confession, then behind closed doors, he spoke to his lawyers and the prosecutors, and he took a plea deal and he admitted guilt on all charges. That was on November 6th. And so in a situation like that, you don't need evidence. You've got a confession. So that is just a crazy argument to say, well, there's absolutely, I think the person said there was zero evidence on Chris Watts. I mean, there's just so much evidence besides what Kissinger said, what his movements were in the GPS data, besides his motive, besides the bed sheet that was left at the well site, and so on. That's the one thing I want to address. The other thing I want to address is another creator sort of circling back. I don't know whether he's just recycling old content because he's run out of ideas or what, but I sort of just caught the little bit where he's sort of talking about this intention to blow up the well site. And I think a lot of people, I've certainly had a lot of people come onto Crime Rocket and think that that's a great idea and that really makes sense. And I sort of just roll my eyes because it's like, if that's what you're thinking, and that is certainly what this creator is thinking, it shows you have absolutely no idea of the criminal psychology of this particular person. Let me repeat that. If you think that this is what happened, you have no clue as to how Chris Watts is as a human being. You still don't have a grasp of his psychology or his criminal psychology. Let me explain what I mean. Someone who is go with the flow, non-confrontational, an introvert, reserved, all that kind of thing, very understated. And just think about that. This crime was committed in a very understated way, kind of invisibly hidden in the fabric of an average workday. No evidence left behind at the crime scene, or no obvious evidence. Shanann's phone was sort of, under the couch pillows, and the residue on the pillowcase was, I think it had already been washed, but that was also later found in the trash. But what I'm trying to say is, it wasn't the bloodbath that the Patrick Frazee case was. It wasn't the sort of obvious, very confrontational, very angry crime, right? It was something that he hid away, and he did it in a kind of a subtle way, if I can put it that way. He quietly on his own went and did all of these things. And that's another thing that I've heard people saying, is that Chris Watts, the person, couldn't possibly have done this on his own. And I think that also just shows someone who just absolutely has no idea who he is, because they haven't thought about him very much. They haven't sort of gotten to know Chris Watts as a person for very long. An introvert is someone who is very sort of in their own minds, and they're capable of being alone much more than an extrovert. They're capable of not being on social media all the time. They're capable of kind of independent thought and all that kind of thing. And let's face it, Chris Watts was alone in Colorado for about 5 weeks, and he was engaged in an affair. He went camping with Kissinger during that time. So this whole idea that he couldn't do anything on his own, he's a mechanic. He's very capable of doing certain things on his own, especially related to his work. And that was why I felt so comfortable taking the remains of his family to a work site that he was so familiar with, because as a physical person, as someone who worked out, who was physically strong and physically fit and who could run around, he was running 5 miles, often 5 miles a time with Nick Thayer. He certainly had the energy and the physical strength to carry bodies, to dig a hole and bury a body. I remember that being one of the arguments as well, that Chris Watts could never have dug the hole. And then it turned out when the people went to the site, well, it was quite a sandy site. And you wouldn't really need much more than 20 minutes to dig a hole in that soft sand, But I think the point that I want to make here is that, this whole idea that you're going to blow up the well site, right? You're going to literally make it explode. I think it's really, it's something you're going to get lots of people on YouTube fascinated with the idea, shocked with the idea, and wanting to sort of talk about it. Oh, it's so shocking that you would do that, and it's a nice, bright sort of catchy idea. It's really going to sort of titillate the senses. Oh, I can just see that explosion. Yes, it makes complete sense. Except it doesn't make any sense, because first of all, Chris Watts isn't that kind of guy that wants a big, loud, noisy, huge, bright, exploding thing in the middle of this farmland. And then you have this massive smoke cloud going there saying, hey, everybody, go and look at this site. What he wanted was to go there by himself, put the remains there, and nobody would ever guess that they're there, and they would basically eventually vanish and kind of disappear, dissolve, turn to dust. That's what he wanted. He wanted them to never be seen again. So this idea that you're going to kind of create this massive billboard on this sort of nondescript farmland in Colorado, you're going to create this massive sort of Technicolor billboard saying, hey, everybody, come and look over here. And like have this massive arrow saying, hey, everybody, come and look here, come and investigate right here. Something happened here. Hey, everybody, come here. It's just crazy. And it's just happened in the Nashville explosion. There was a massive explosion there, and they found the DNA of the guy that was at the center of it. So this idea that you're going to blow something up, that's going to destroy evidence, it's not. So I don't really understand how you even think about this, other than that it's quite a catchy little idea that maybe this is what he was going to do. But let's face it, it's got nothing to do with Chris Watts' psychology. And bear in mind, if Chris Watts was at the work site when it blew up, he would be called in. I'm talking about if you take away all the other stuff, the bodies and everything else, Chris Watts would probably be fired. He'd probably be fired for, blowing up the well site, whether by accident or whatever, and they would probably find out that it wasn't by accident. Not only that, Chris Watts, I don't think would want to lose his job, because he's in financial dwang as it is, and also he wants to be around Kissinger, who is a work colleague. So he really wouldn't want to jeopardize that part of the equation by sort of shooting himself in the foot by detonating the well site that he was at on his own. But just in the most basic way, he's an introvert, he's understated, he's go with the flow, he's not a confrontational person, which as a result, he took a plea deal and he didn't go to trial. And the opposite of that is blowing something up and saying, can a huge crowd come here right now, please, and investigate me? It's absolutely got. It's like if you want to think of the most absurd thing that would make sense in terms of Chris Watts, there you have it. And I think a good way to contrast what I'm talking about is Nutgate. Nutgate was an explosion that happened in North Carolina, Did Chris Watts want to be associated with that? Did Chris Watts want Nutgate to happen? Did Chris Watts want the explosion of the divorce and all that to happen? Did Chris Watts want Shanann to go onto Facebook and say, let's do the gender reveal, and who cares if Kessinger's friends see that I'm actually still involved in this marriage? And you know what all of that was meant to do? Avoid the explosion. The plea deal was to avoid the explosive sort of news headlines and press coverage. The murder itself was meant to avoid the explosion of, Shanann's sort of wrath, I guess. If she could act the way that she did over nuts, can you imagine how she would act over an affair? And even when Chris Watts took the polygraph, he did it to avoid the sort of, I wouldn't even call it an explosion, but the discomfort of someone saying, why don't you want to take the polygraph if you've got nothing to hide? And all he could say is, well, I'm not really comfortable with that. So he took that to avoid that, right? Even when he was interrogated at Warpen, all he had to do was say, "Jeepers, guys, you've kind of ambushed me here. I'm not really ready to talk about what's happened." And we know that he was actually angry to see them. He didn't like what happened. But instead of confronting them, he went with the flow. Now, something like blowing up the well site isn't going with the flow. It's not keeping something invisible. It's not my wife and children have vanished. It's basically it's almost like finding a giant Colorado cheerleader, like huge, the size of Godzilla, jumping up and down like with pom-poms saying, "Hey, everybody, come and look at this." And the amazing thing with a lot of the commentators, authors, creators, is you'll hear them talk incessantly about and use their own terms. So they'll say Chris Watts is a narcissist, or he's a monster, or he's this. And they never use the terms that are actually used by either Chris Watts himself, or his wife, or his family members, or even the investigators to describe him, which is an introvert. And you know why they don't use it? It's because it's like this soft, lame term. It's not very exciting. You're not going to get a lot of views saying, well, Chris Watts was an introvert. You sort of want to make him more like, well, maybe he was a psychopath or a sociopath or a narcissist. And that is kind of what's wrong with YouTube, is it wants to titillate you, and people want to be titillated, but it's just not the truth. And if you think of a guy like Joe Kenda, how does he figure out what is the truth? He's not a guy who gets hysterical, and you can see that Joe Kenda's kind of a grounded fellow, a guy who cuts through the crap. And you kind of need the same thing with YouTube creators. What do you guys think? You need your investigators to be authentic, don't you think? For those interested in the JonBenet Ramsey case, the very next episode is kind of a cracker. It's a little bit sensitive information, so I'm trying to figure out how to bring it onto YouTube. It's a little bit of a minefield, so I'm just sort of working on that. And then just a final thing I just want to leave you with is that I went grocery shopping this afternoon. When I entered the building, I bumped into a guy that I've often run with, and he told me that another guy that is part of our running group has just died of coronavirus. He's actually my father's age, and this guy was quite fit certainly for his age. And it's just very sad. It's quite sad when you start hearing about people that you know quite well, and people that certainly you like, that are now no longer with us. And he apparently was in hospital with something else. I think he had gastroenteritis or something, and he picked up corona in the hospital, and then apparently he was recovering, and then he just suddenly died. And later on I went into the store grocery shopping, and when I got to the meat aisle, there was someone standing there who it was like coughing, like this hacking cough. And I don't know, it just was quite scary. It could have been any kind of cough, but given what is going on, it was hard to imagine that it wasn't what you'd think it is. So I just want to say to you guys, wherever you are, be safe, be careful. Now is probably a good time to not do certain things that you would normally do and just be more careful than you normally are. I'm sure you're feeling pandemic fatigue, but I'd also think that the first month or two or three of 2021 is going to be the hardest of the entire pandemic, and then after that we might see things gradually coming back to normal. Well, let's hope so. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.